Welcome to the Regeneration Podcast for us here in Studio 5475. It's the eve of Thanksgiving Day, recording the Regeneration Podcast with my good pal, Michael Martin. Michael, tell me, hunting season for you, what's going on?
Yeah, we talk about how things change for me. I'm telling you what, from November 15th to the end of the month, it's like I live in a different world from academia for sure.
Yeah.
I spend so much time out in the woods. Actually, I do two things. I hunt for deer and simultaneously, because they usually don't come, it's not like it's traffic. So I get a lot of time to think. And then it ends up a lot of time to write poetry. So I've been writing a lot of poetry.
I was going to say, are you getting epiphanies or what are you doing with those imaginative states?
Well, what I love about it is I look forward to it all year. And I realize I think I look forward to it mostly because I'll be out in the woods by myself and nobody can bug me.
Yeah.
And so, because if I'm in the house trying to write poetry or whatever, millions of interruptions, which I can handle that. I wrote my whole dissertation at the kitchen table with a bunch of little kids in the house.
Yeah, you have to fight through those things, that's for sure.
But it's so nice to have time to contemplate. And that's
my weekend's not too busy.
Yeah. That kind of contemplative state of being is where it comes from.
Absolutely. How about this with the deer you've been hunting? Our guest today, who joins us maybe for the fourth time, if he travels to the very north of his country, James Tunney, would you see reindeer up there? Or
yes.
Do you have to? Okay. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen reindeer in the wild?
In Finland, I taught a few times up in the Arctic Circle. So up there they have plenty.
Fascinating. And before we signed on, Michael and James were talking about a lot of anniversaries today. Jump back into your litany, James.
Well, today, of course, is John F. Kennedy's anniversary, and it's also C.S. Lewis, and it's also Aldous Huxley. There's even an Irish writer, Patrick McGill, died on the same day. And for me, this represents, I've talked to you before, about a 100-year period from 1863 to 1963.
Right.
I believe essentially the New World started in 1963, and that we're in the later stages of its final crystallization. So I believe there's a lot of importance, and God rest their souls as well. We remember them. And C.S. Lewis is the one out of them that has spoken to me most significantly in the last few years. And
because it's the anniversary of him, I saw so many quotes on Twitter today, and one was a Twitter thread, and I'll be honest, these quotes were much better. I think I still probably haven't read C.S. Lewis deeply enough. Some of these quotes were brilliant, deep and rich, but go ahead. I was just blown away by C.S. Lewis today myself.
Actually, on the topic that we're talking about, there's a relevance. It just struck me today about the anniversary, and you chose today. Sometimes there's a synchronicity, but hopefully I can show in the kind of motif or symbols that I was thinking about that actually they're relevant, or these demonstrate a kind of relevance at a higher level of some of the underlying symbols.
Right.
Hold on a second, James. Is that John D looking over your shoulder?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And that's art. Actually, let's again use this. Describe yourself to our listeners. Hopefully, many have heard our conversations with you or have seen your work other places. But you're an artist. You're a writer. Describe your background, James, again.
Well, my professional background is law. So
right.
And primarily as an academic, as a senior lecturer, was the most work I did in. And everything I did in law was aimed at the future. So in the 80s, I was studying issues like mRNA. And when it came out, and in the intellectual property context and information technology, heavily interested in the conceptual side of those issues. I left academia about 20 years ago, totally, with no desire to have any contact with it, and intended to leave 100%. So I burned my bridges, boats, whatever you want, with the intention of focusing on family and on spiritual development, artistic development. And that's relevant to what we're talking about today, insofar as when I started off with a blank canvas and saying, well, what do I want to explore in a painting sense, which was the primary commitment, I came on the theme of the face in Western art, which we can talk about. But so in the context of working on art, and I was painting for a good few years and looking after the kids, the mystical thing began to become more important and more pressing and press in on itself and force me to write about it and write itself, if you like. And I in the last few years, I began to write. In fact, I wrote a novel, which I'd say a handful of people in the world have read, but it was written before this stuff and I had lockdowns in London. I wrote a short novel as well, where people were getting vaccinated. It was in the future, but they were getting vaccinated for Australian fruit bat virus before the thing happened. Oh. So my instincts were right on some of these. I could see the thing coming. We can talk about that some other time. So what I'm doing, what came out of that was to concentrate on the need for spiritual evolution as the cause of our problems and the solution. So that's the first priority. And the second one is to combat the imminent extinction of humans in a kind of self-suicide mission, to move towards post-humanism, which I believe is very close. I believe we're facing the end.
Important distinction between a cataclysm that wipes out biological life, which is possible, but you're saying the extinction of what it means to be humans, the extinction of humans.
And the deliberate erasing of boundaries on the notion of humanity, post-humanism. They're saying it openly. The AI people are saying it openly. They will create God. They will abolish humans, and I just cannot understand how many people are not willing to take them seriously. And I do, because I've been studying this. I remember going back to the early 70s when I was really interested in what Arthur C. Clarke was saying about merger of man and humans and machine. Right. I took them seriously. People say, well, you don't understand about technology. No, the problem is I do understand about technology, and I take them seriously. And that's what I have been working on, to try and understand what all this regulatory system is about, what the global rules are about, what they're doing, what the objectives of international legal firms are, what the game is. And game is an important word. It's interesting that Elon Musk's ex-partner wrote a song about Elon Musk, talking about the great player of games. There's a great game going on. What people don't understand is the game is for their consciousness and their eternal soul. This is what I believe in. I believe this is what they are. Instead of playing games, I'd advise young people to notice the big game that they're involved in, because they're the objects of the game. But again, I'm not saying that in a depressing way. Ultimately, in the end of all this...
That's great. Not depressing.
No. Ultimately, in the end of all this, the people that commit to their spiritual consciousness will triumph. There may be loads of losses, but they're not going to lose individually. And the ultimate spiritual triumph will happen. So that's going to happen. It may be grim before that, but what people don't want to do is to trade their soul in before that. That's so.
Doesn't that image? But doesn't that image, just even to bracket that, the like the human and the ability to try and stay human, but Michael and James, like we had David Bentley Hart on, that kind of reflects on the issue of apostasis, if you ask me. That you can look at things in one way and say there's no hell, if there's a God. But even for the mental states I've seen some people live in, which is a form of death and isolation. And Blake said, to find eternity in a grain of sand and so forth. But, you can find eternity in a moment. And I know people in hell. And this notion that the future, almost on this plane, not this idea of going to an afterlife, you still have this division, it's just, do you see connections between those?
I've become kind of more convinced in this idea of a kind of self-perpetuating hell, of a reality of persistence. And this is actually crucial. We can go on to talk about Faces and what C.S. Lewis said, because it's a very revealing idea that he has when he wrote about that. But perhaps I can sketch out an idea that there's just three things that have been on my mind, which kind of, I think, fits into the discourse. I hope fits into your discourse, and that I'd like to put out there as a hypothesis. So in this context, I'm talking about my hypothesis from a personal perspective, how I read it, because artists read things differently, as you well know, that they look in the context of reading signs, it's a different language. So when Michael is teaching about literature, there's motifs and ways of reading and hermeneutics and a whole lot. When we come to visual symbols, we're in a different order altogether, and people don't understand them. So in the last since I was a kid, but in an intensive way in the last 20 years, I've been trying to read the symbols as well. And they bring me to a different place than I would do if I come to a textual analysis. And curiously, I come to some of the same places like that Guido Preparata does by a different route. But I know that they're the right places to look in. So it's like a number of dogs in a pack. If it's on a hunting context,
right.
they know that the fox is in one place. I don't want to be
That's
down on the
interesting.
poor old
Guido's
foxes,
kind
but
of
it's
getting
like that.
popular. There's lots of other videos about him now, and he often mentions the Regeneration podcast. But yeah, I see you guys as barking up the same tree. Go ahead.
Yeah, appropriately barked. So there's three elements to it. If you don't mind, I'd like to go through the school. The school, we can stop after that. Perhaps the face and the head and what that means in my view. So there's an interesting element to me when I've just finished a book on myth and AI and the mythic aim of AI, and I've been fascinated with the way they're using all these people, Elon Musk, and that are putting up a whole camouflage of mythic explanations for AI. Of course, it came out of the military-industrial complex, and that's why they're doing so. They're all talking about magic and that, but they're also very interested in magic, and we can see this in particular Arthur C. Clarke, and he traces. If you look at a story he did, I remember Babylon. He traces. The implication is that his motivation goes back to the Bible and Genesis and the effort to establish Babel, or the effort to deny the power of God by establishing a one world, if you like. So symbols are very, very important. And the symbol that is of utter importance in this is the skull. Now, we kind of think we know what the skull means, what the symbology means. It seems to be self-evident, but sometimes we don't always think deeply about it. So there's a dark side and a positive side to it. The dark side goes back to Babylon, and we can link up to modern context, the Skull and Bones Society, for example, Kerry and Bush. They're in a continuity back to Babylonian magical practices. Now, before we start getting cut off, I'm not saying, historically through a continuation. But if we go back to Babylon and look at the researchers that have written about Babylon, that they describe the use of skulls in order to contact the dead, classic necromancy. So once you had the skull, you had a power over the spirit, or connection with the spirit. Now, this was the same as in Western context, where the Celts focus on the skull and the power of the skull. We have the celebration skull in the northern context, which is skull, probably drinking out of the skull. So it was clear that there was power in the skull, and if you had control over the skull, you had control of the person, not just in this life, but probably in the afterlife. And if we look at the Tower of London, it's built on a hill where the skull of Bran, the giant, was. And I don't know, I can't find the etymology of the word brain. I wonder if it's linked to that Bran. But this skull was planted on the hill to protect Britain in a magical practice. So they had magical power. So this was clear to the Celts, and it was clear to most cultures. So the point I was making about Elon Musk and that is that if they say, "Oh, Christianity is nonsense," it's a myth. The irony is that it places a higher obligation on them to explain why this is the greatest story ever told and why the myth is so persistent. This is
I follow.
This is the paradox that's not there. Instead, they're fascinated with Prometheus and the myth. As you know, the Prometheus, as far as I know, hasn't appeared to anybody. There's no great doctrine associated with Prometheus. All it is a license to use fire and energy, without considering the risk, basically, as far as I can see, in many senses. So this is a key myth that they use, but they deny the significance, apparently, of the Christian myth, if you like, which I don't believe that the Christian story is a myth, and I accord with what C.S. Lewis said, that it's a true myth, a myth that actually happened, where it has the element. But if we look at the myth or the story, and we look at it from an artistic perspective, there's one symbol that comes out. I've talked about Golgotha with Jeff on New Thinking Aloud, so continuation of that.
Okay.
And what that means from a Steinerian perspective. But one thing that I haven't talked about in that context, have elsewhere, but is the power of the myth of the skull, or the significance of the skull. We can see this anticipated in Plato's cave, if you like, and the idea of being inside and coming out. But if you were a child reading and presented with the story in as a story form, you couldn't fail to understand or see, if you look at the pictures, the significance of the skull in this story. Now, it's not just me that thinks that. If you look at what Philip K. Dick has written about the crucifixion, he's written a short story called The Skull. So the point being that his intuition brings him to the idea that the skull is the crucial issue. And he wrote, it's on the internet, it's very short. I'd recommend to people to read The Skull. It's a very
By
good
Philip K. Dick, yeah.
story, 1958. It'll only take you a couple of minutes, but it's very interesting. If you look at General Gordon, when he goes to, in the kind of Protestant reclamation of the Holy Land, and he's looking for the tomb of Jesus, he's going looking for something associated with a skull, and that leads him to the Garden Tomb, because there's a hill that looks like a skull. His instincts were right. Both of their cases, for me, according to the signs, if you like a Jacob Boehme way, you should be looking at the skull, because, of course, we have Golgotha, the place of the skull, place of the skulls, Calvary, Calvarium, or cranion in the Greek. It's all pointing towards the skull. And there's an extra dimension. If we look through all medieval art, there's always often a skull underneath the cross. What is the skull? It's
everybody's
the skull
seen
of
it.
Adam or the skull of Goliath. So we have the stories that both of their skulls are under this. So this is a continuity as well, looking forward or backward and forward from Adam to Goliath to Jesus. Now, of course, the story of Jesus has an extra dimension. We have escape from the hill of the skull. We have the implication that the spirit transcends the mortal form. And here we have this symmetry that runs throughout history of a counterpoint between the skull and the triumph over the skull, if you like, as death. And we have the use of the skull as the symbol of power. So the negative side of the skull, going back to Babylon, magic, sorcery, up to, well, if you like, Skull and Bones, through the French Revolution, we can talk about the head a bit more, a little bit separate. But the power over the skull is seen to be a symbol of the domination, of the capture. We see it in Ireland. Humphrey Gilbert, after you were beaten, when they raid your village, they decapitate your family. They stick the heads outside a tent. So when you're going to negotiate, you're passing by the skulls of your family. Another interesting element of that, of course, at that time, or we look to the time of Robert Boyle, the scientist, is that there was a big trade in skull moss. It was a medical preparation. So they scraped the skull off the moss, and they grind down the skulls to use in medical preparations. It's written about in the scholarship about cannibalism, and this Robert Boyle, etc. And they didn't have to worry at that time about the supply, because there was always loads coming from Ireland. So this is a deep negative aspect, if you like, of the skull. Mm-hmm. So when I come to interpret this element today of the penetration of the skull, the physical penetration of the skull in transhumanism, it's in the sorcery
lineage,
sorcery side of things. And there's other funny things about Golgotha, apart from the name. Even if we look at this about consciousness, for me, Jesus and the robbers, the right side and the left side, it's a prefiguration in many ways of what Ian McGilchrist has talked about.
Interesting.
One robber says, "Prove yourself, show it." The other guy says, "Well, I believe." And that's right.
That's the right brain. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. That's wild. Right.
Yeah. If you there's an interesting other connection. The Tau, for example, I have a kind of belief about the significance of the Tau cross, the T cross. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I would think about that is because it's another shape on the sutures of the skull. Is either the shape of the body of Christ or a cross. And funnily enough, in the sign context, the latest developments in relation to proteins in the brain that I think are fundamentally important from a physiological perspective in the control of consciousness in Alzheimer's are they've called them the tau proteins. It's kind of a remarkable thing. So what is kind of happening is that the symbology of Golgotha from the skull perspective, I believe, this is my personal belief, is the symbology of the end of Catholic times. Now, coming up to I believe, if we're looking for dates, you'd want to look at 2,000 years after the guesstimate of the death of Christ as the time when, if you're an anti-Christian, you would decide, well, that's a nice time to finish the Christian era, which is clear that the Christian era is.
Do you see this dovetailing pretty closely with the movement from Pisces to Aquarius?
I don't see. I don't look at it in those terms, but certainly that there are readings there that corroborate it from a different. The reason why I don't talk too much about is I don't know enough. I've read it. I can read secondhand, but it's not something that I particularly. But the fish is a critical symbol of the brain, as we see in the Salmon of Knowledge. It's a critical link that goes back to Irish legend with knowledge, with intelligence. So it's a different it's a different movement and an instantaneous increase in intelligence in a mythic way that is prefigured. So that connection is there, the Salmon of Knowledge and all that. So which would be another symbol of a different type of knowledge. But certainly it could be corroborated by.
So you're saying a once in every 2,000 years kind of transformation?
No,
Am I hearing that? No.
I'm saying no. I don't put it in cyclical. I don't see the world in the same cyclical ways. What I'm saying is that either if you take it as a myth, or if you take it as a divine intervention, the story is speaking to us now. The
I see what you're saying.
Then are now, and that's why we have to look at the symmetry. The symmetry is critical.
You made that clear. That's good.
Yeah. So there's another. So when I'm looking at what's happening in relation to brain research, and particularly the control of the brain and control of consciousness, which is what I'm concerned about, I'm finding strange parallels that are suggested in the biblical, in the crucifixion and in Golgotha, which suggests to me that it was anticipated. It's an anticipation of the end of the Catholic Christian times, and it's pointing to what happens at this point when a fork comes in the road, where you either choose spiritual consciousness or you choose, well, effectively the road to hell, the road to assimilation, to giving up your soul.
Or almost like Michael's house church. What are you hearing, Michael?
Well, I think, just what I hear from James right now, I mean, what I keep thinking about is these kinds, we can call them occult forces, or we can call them the World Economic Forum, or the WHO.
I like your series of tweets for the last week. He's just demanding that somebody somewhere, just in the church, announce something bad about one of these organizations somewhere.
Yeah, well, no, I just want,
it's really funny.
I always hear it from the ortho bros, right? And I said, okay, well, show me one example where the Pope or any of the Eastern patriarchs called out the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates or all the other criminals, and they can't find one example.
It's really funny.
Because there isn't any. But anyway, to what I hear from James, and these guys know exactly what's going on. So and they anticipate, like James is saying, Agenda 2030. Well, they know that's Agenda 2030 is trying to head off that Christ impulse at the pass. And similarly, was it a year and a half ago when there was this intense conjunction, or in a square, well, it was a conjunction for me, but it was a square from Saturn to Uranus, which happened right around the time that the Ukraine war started. And I was looking at it for months ahead of time and thinking, well, this is when something weird's going to happen. And the thing is, those guys they did their homework. They pretend they don't study these things on the ground, but they do. So they always try to anticipate what's going to happen and finesse it to their advantage, right?
I like how
I
one
think it
thing is
always
when
works.
James always writes a list when one of us speaks because he can always make
Yeah.
connections. I just want to add, like, sometime add in the middle of it, like meatball sandwich, tube of toothpaste, and then James will still bring all that stuff in, you know. But I saw you writing away, James, and Michael said a lot. Yeah,
one more point, which is interesting and may be crucial, is, and this is a remarkable symmetry in my head. You know, people might call me mad. I don't really care. I'm going to start telling people what I believe to be the case. If you look at what an aspect Blake chose, again, these people have a key intuition. He chose, or one of his key engravings or whatever it was of the drawing of lots for Christ's garment.
Right.
Now, this again, independently, I was focused on that because I never really got what was significant about that in a kind of mythic or a religious sense. I said, what is that? See, the point being that in all of these stories, there are unfolded obvious things that we don't pay attention to. So I was looking, when I was looking back again about the correspondences between the front and the end, like in 1863 and 64, Syllabus of Errors, 1963, and Pacem in Terris. And if you look at actually John the 23rd, Pacem in Terris, that's really the globalist agenda. If you look at it, I've looked at it, read the encyclical again from the perspective of C.S. Lewis and Scientocracy, and tell me that that's really inspired by God. I can't see it. Read it again, bearing in mind what C.S. Lewis has written about Scientocracy, and you can see a.
Where do you think C.S. Lewis's best writings on Scientocracy is, James, for the listeners?
That hideous strength is a critical
right.
fairy tale, but till we have faces, and we have to come back to that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the seamless garment. So why are they drawing lots? Because they didn't want to separate this seamless garment. Now, the seamless garment, as it happens, it's believed that the true seamless garment, of course, we know there's loads of debate about these things, ended up in Germany. So there's a thing claiming to be the seamless garment that people revere. And where is it? It's kind of remarkable. It's in Trier. Now, what's Trier significant for? It's where Karl Marx was born. It's a curious kind of one of these correspondence. You know, you might think that's fanciful, but anyway, what's important about that? What is it called in the Greek? The Greek for the seamless garments is chiton, Chiton. So this is the same word for the substance chitin. It's the exact same word, just the I is changed. That is derived from insects that they are using for tissue engineering, and which I believe and suggest is going to be available in the human body for them to experiment on us. So insofar as it may be indigestible, whatever, by the body, it will be available to re-engineer the human body without our consent. So the chiton of the seamless garment has a deeper significance. It corresponds in an odd way with this chiton, which is called because it's the garment of the clothes, or the carapace of crabs and things like this, that we're taking into our human body in this great movement towards insectification and different foods. To me, this is if you like, a warning from the originals, myth or story. It's telling us that this is the thing to look at. And mark my words, you will see more about the dangers and use and application of chitin in the body, which can be activated in some way or used to change the body from inside. That's
and where are we getting our chitin again?
You'll be getting it from your insect food that they're going to feed you. Put in your foods.
Like they're already adding some food products but they have, fancy Latinate names that you don't, unless you know what they're talking about, you'll just think, oh, that's like riboflavin, but it's actually insect.
So they're going to get rid of the kulaks like Michael and that in the next few years, or Bill Gates going to give him a few bob and he's going off to the Caribbean alternatively, or you go to the prison camp or whatever, God forbid. But they're going to get rid of these guys. So your choice of what you're going to eat is going to change radically as we move in. And if you remember the world, the flesh, and the devil, Bernal said that those that didn't want to change, they could be experimented upon, and that curiosity would override humanity. He said that 100 years ago. There's nothing new about this. There's nothing fanciful or by chance.
Right.
As well as, it's interesting, they're talking about one of the guys that wrote I, Cyborg. He said, and it's quite a while ago now, he said that the people that won't change, they will be the chimpanzees of the future. Now, in 1860, Charles Kingsley described the Irish as the white chimpanzees. So in the future, not only are we going to be chimpanzees, white chimpanzees, but the white will be negative as well when it wasn't in the past. Worse. Post-humanism is not intended to liberate in the way that they say. It's intended to bring us down to a lower level.
Oh, totally agree.
And I don't. So in relation to Guido's instincts, I agree with that. So the long and the short of that, and I could go on about that, is that I believe that the crucifixion, Golgotha, the story, in whatever way you want to interpret it, speaks directly towards an imminent crucifixion that the human body is going to experience in a cosmic way, the entire human race. We can see this even the symbology, if you look at it, and Michael as well, from your reading of literature, in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
right.
When Randall McMurphy is on getting the electroconvulsive therapy, they describe it as a crown of thorns. And that's a quite perceptive, artistic reading of it.
I've always thought the same thing. It kind of blows me away every time.
And also, who developed those? Who developed that medical therapy? It was the cyberneticians did. Gray Walter and that, the guys that are experimenting with the tortoises. He was the one that made some of these advances on that. It wasn't for any therapeutic purposes. It was for mind control. There was no other. And books, The Cybernetic Mind, I think, elaborates on this. The cybernetics and psychiatry were fundamentally linked in the thing. So it's not about, for no other purpose than the control of the human mind. These things started, in my view. In summary, on the skull is a critical symbol, and the control of the skull is a critical symbol. And an example, which I put on the negative side, Teilhard de Chardin, look at what he's doing. He's holding up the skull and saying, this proves where we come from. What is he involved in? He's involved in the Pitdown hoax, whether he directly was involved in that or not, but he was involved in what is a classic hoax in science with the so-called finding of this skull in 1912. He was involved in the finding of Peking Man, the skull Peking Man. Now, this was used by the Chinese nationalists at in the encouragement of communism to show that really man came from here in China, in that place in China, and that no connection with any divine things. And it was very, very significant. Where did that evidence go? It disappeared. It was going to America. It disappeared. The Rockefeller-funded research, Teilhard de Chardin, again, the skull is, there's a battle for control on truth over the control of the skull. This is the way the magical mind is approaching this issue. So
again, kind of like Michael, he contrasts Sophia and Ahriman. You're going to contrast the skull with the face, it sounds like, or no?
There's two elements. One, the first bit is that the story from Golgotha shows us that there's a full acceptance of incarnation, but it transcends that. It's the container. And so, in some of the Holy Grail stories, there's a suggestion that a grail represents the skull. Again, there's Michael knows all that literature, but that's more recent. But there's an interesting symbol in that. But what I'm saying is, the skull is not a bad symbol, but it is the symbol that you focus on from a left brain control function. And of course, the skull is inexpressive. It doesn't change. It continues in the thing. But if you see the human person a particular way, you will believe that controlling their skull is the key thing to control their spirit. That's the context. And it's not a rejection of the physical form, because we know, I believe, that the key thing in the Christian story before then is of incarnation and the vindication and significance of embodiment, the thing that post-humanists claim they're celebrating, but they're not doing that.
Yeah.
I believe that before that, the message of the life is about the significance of being embodied.
Do you stretch any of this to the skeletal structure in general? You know, because I'm thinking of the contrast for Ivan Illich too, between the church as it, you know, the skull could be the shattering of the skull, versus the church as she, kind of the mystical body. It doesn't have, you know, clearly delineated boundaries and so forth. But I'm looking at other things that kind of map on decently when we're looking about where we are and where we're going.
Well, certainly, it may come a bit more to the living in the head bit. We're going to talk about that in a minute, which comes to that, and it comes to the issue. Well, I mean, Steiner talks about there's a necessary Ahrimanic bit, and that the body is the kind of the Ahrimanic bit controlled, or the bones and that. So he does talk about that. So it's not as if everything is bad about the body, and it's certainly not a rejection of the skull. It's a rejection about the interpretation of the skull. But that's there. And so what I'm saying is that motif vindicates the relevance of this story, whether one sees it as a myth or divine truth. There's a remarkable story in that tells us about the next 2,000 years. It really tells us about what the battle is. So we know what's going on, at least. There is also, going back to Genesis and the Garden of Eden and the snake and the idea of bruising the head and bruising the heel, and that comes into it. But the second bit, if I go, perhaps I go on to the face. Is there anything else on just
Michael?
Again, I could go on for hours on that.
Oh, just I was going to say, I can't help but think of this book right here, The Redemption of Thinking.
Yeah.
By Rudolf Steiner, which is about, actually, this was put out, believe it or not, which is weird for Steiner. It was not published by an anthroposophical press. It was published by Hodder and Stoughton.
Huh.
The British publisher, I think they go back to the 1800s, early 1800s. And in his book on Aquinas, but also his understanding of the mystery of Golgotha, what one of the things that the crucifixion of Jesus did, and when the blood touched the earth, is it made the possibility for imaginative thinking, right? That's why it's the redemption of thinking. It starts with Golgotha, and that's what Steiner interpreted Aquinas is doing, is continuing that. And I think what we see right now, and what James has been talking, part of what, one of the many dangers of the internet, or especially social media, or getting your information from the archons, is that and I see this in students, they've gotten really stupid in the last decade. They have undeveloped brains because they don't play as children. They don't imagine. Their imagination is externalized into video games and things like that, or films, but they don't know how to imagine and play, and which makes it easy for them to be prone to propaganda, for one thing, but also they're prone to any kind of mind control, because it and it's not just them, it's everybody, but especially I see it especially in the young, because I've been spent so much time with 18 and 19-year-olds in my last 30 years. It's very different right now, because they don't have that capacity, and this is a word Steiner uses all the time, capacity for imagination, not like they used to. I mean, you still find one here and there, but and if you look, you can tell, because if you look at the poetry and not just poetry, but the writing from 100 years ago or even more, there is much more imaginative heft into much of the writing than you're going to see right now, which has become more kind homogenized into like a really narrow,
there's been a flattening out, Yeah.
flattened and homogenized. And I'm looking forward to see where James goes with this. But part of what I keep thinking about in this conversation is, what I call in the submerged reality a poetic metaphysics, or an awakening of an imaginative thinking, which is, to me, seems the antipole of what's being created around us, and through AI. And so AI is a perfect example. It's not imaginative at all. It's an aggregate.
Yeah. To tie that point into a point that comes true from what Mike generally said, he's often interested in practices. You often say about, well, how is this relevant in practices? And I notice you make a point about why young people are attracted to traditional mass, and you make a point about kind of some obsessive bit. I think there's also a parallel to that, which I agree with, a kind of Harry Potter dimension to the magical attraction as well. But in relation to the practices as well, there is a message in this symbology about what it is we're meant to be doing to combat the thing as well, because the things come together, and the divine inspiration, if you want to call that, the mythic dimension, is juxtaposed in contrast to what happens there. That's why I believe that France is the basis of the world control system through Britain, through the British Empire, but really
France
the Norman
is
connection.
interesting. Okay.
Well, the Norman connection historically, but
right.
It's the British Empire, the Anglosphere, but really their connections go back to France in the story of it, the Normans. And that's where most apart from Italy, that's where most Marian apparitions are. And I think that's no accident. There's a correspondence between it. That's where most battles in the world have taken place in France. There's an inherent occult element. And of course, we have 19th century, another area that I know Michael is interested in. Well, I'm going to talk about that as well. But 19th century Paris, and of course, Salome was the key image, which was the head, which we come back to. But I don't know if you want to have points there, Mike, before I go on to talk about.
It's interesting you say that, because I meant to look it up, but I hadn't had a chance. Been so busy this morning. I saw somebody posted something on social media today there's a new book about magic, and somebody said it was just really fascinating. But what fascinated me was the title of the book. It's the name of the book, and I can't remember the author, is The Head of the Baptist.
There you go. Yeah.
Which is an important. St. John the Baptist is certainly one of my patron saints.
Critical from that 19th century. It's a critical motif in all the literature, as you well know.
Orpheus as well,
it's the head. It's the head on the plate. It's the skull, but it's also the head, which we can talk about.
And I'm always just trying to help our listeners too. Like when we get into these distinctions between and I'm purposely being a little bit reductionist, like a good image of the skull and a bad image of the skull. Some people might think of if we're in kind of an epical shift, and I'm not trying to throw this on your work, James, let me know, but so much of a certain telling of the story that I again see in Western classical music, from original harmony to discord to this kind of circle two, or Barfield's final participation. If we use that 3-stage, some of the stuff I see going on now, and feel free to disagree, is we could have, or when I mentioned Paul Ricoeur, he talked about the second naivete. We can be the difference between childishness and childhood, second childhood. But the big one would be, are we going back to a return, or a return with a difference? That final movement in Western classical music, Powys called it, this poetry of sailors, departure, sailors, embarkation. And that final one is, embarkation and return. And, some of these, the worst is the corruption of the best themes is coming out too. Am I right with some of that as a kind of a heuristic for some people?
The implication for me on the threshold is that the bringing to a head of the negative is the force which makes us move
like Christ
on
and Antichrist?
Kind of. I don't want to use a Hegelian dialectic, because I don't believe in that the way. But in the sense that insofar as I identify the failure to evolve spiritually, to live out the full potential of spiritual consciousness, we haven't done so. That has caused the problems. It has fed this dark side. And now we're coming to a choice that we can either let the dark side triumph effectively or reassert the light side. So it's a crossing point. So it's the two forces are coming. It will be a different, it will echo
a return with
Barfield in some sense of that we can't go back, but we can integrate. We can integrate and rediscover. I think that would a more synthesis. I think to move forward. That's the way I would interpret
Right.
that. Yeah.
And so you're talking about the face now, right?
Face, yeah. One last point, just to refer back to, and you've talked about this when you talked about with Harrington about the pill. It's interesting that, and to refer back to the Aquarian or the astrological context or the astronomical context, the Normans come to Britain in 1066, and Halley's Comet had come. So what they saw in the sky was, which they knew about, was the long-haired star. And what I find very, very interesting is 900 years later, the long-haired stars that come from Britain to America, the Beatles, in 66 and 900 years later, declare that they're more popular than Jesus. And when John Lennon sings, when John Lennon sings in 1971 about Imagine, he says exactly what Klaus Schwab says: imagine no possessions, no religion, no countries, whatever. It's quite remarkable. You know, I don't think
these are very illustrative.
People put aside these things. If you sing it's okay, you know, it's nice, they're trying to be good to us, but actually we have to interpret on a different symbolic level. Okay, at the face. So I started off painting, and I looked at millions of images, and I said, okay, well, what do I want to paint? And then I had to say, well, where is Western painting and where is international painting? What is it? You know, because you can paint anything, you know, there's loads of things, you paint things, but I was really looking at intellectually, what is it that I wanted to paint? So I came to a theme, and the theme was called Journey to Abstraction. And what that indicated was that there was a movement in the depiction of the human face in Western painting. And it was very, very clear. So I started off by making references and quotations or collages or a rap, if you like, to take the rap example, that idea of bringing in different elements into a collage thing, to make reference to the historical things, to try and interpret what they were doing when they were painting and where it's going in the future. And the key reason why it was called Journey to Abstraction was because in the Western canon of painting, it was the one thing that was absolutely clear was that the movement in painting was away from depiction of the human face. Absolutely clear. You can't look.
When did that trajectory start moving in the opposite direction? Presumably there was a movement to and a movement away.
It was in Western painting. It was always there.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It was always there. And one of the reasons, and we can go back to the Celtic thing, that they had the head and things. It's in the we can see an early Christian paint, but in what we call Western paint, well before the modern era, the figure is there. We can see then, of course, some disintegration, cubism, which in many senses was influenced by pragmatism, seeing things from different angles. If you look at Picasso, he starts off with a beautiful picture of the girl at the communion in a classic representational way. And then the figure begins to break up. And he was a friend of, when he was in London, he stayed with J.D. Bernal, who wrote The World of Flesh and the Devil, when in the communist meet. There's a movement away from the figure. And that we can see that, and we see a distortion of the figure. We see the German expressionists sensing that there's something coming. We see a lot of disfigurement. A lot of the German expressionists were seeing the world was populated with people that were injured in the First World War. And we see this general movement. And when you get to the American painters, and particularly the government funding painters, because a lot of people forget that a lot of writing, a lot of poetry, a lot of art in America was funded by the government and by foundations. But anyway, the figure begins to disappear. So one artist then that I was interested in, for example, was Sean Scully, who I went to meet in Germany in his studio, and there's virtually no figures. He started off as a German expressionist, but there's no figures, and he would be classic, big, huge paintings. He has a studio there with his paints. He was around with Mapplethorpe, and the Mapplethorpe did a photo, a picture of him. He was in that era in New York, but that was what was in paintings with no reference to anything human in it. Now, I came to the conclusion that this represented something else. Now, obviously, there's a movement away from the classic Western Christian depiction of crucifixion. Now, funny enough, Bacon and that, of course, Francis Bacon refers back to the crucifixion. But he's kind of moving out at the end of the figurative thing. Now, although it comes back in kind of portraiture in another sense, in the canon, the figure was disappearing. And I believe that what that represents, it's a mirror of the zeitgeist of the controlling forces. They don't want, the human is going out of the picture literally. It's as simple as that. That was what the face was. Now, in terms of, say, the Catholic prophetic tradition or the mystical tradition, of course, we have some interesting premonitions on this. And we go back to, you mentioned La Salette. So La Salette was in 1846, but what preceded La Salette was the apparitions of Jesus to Sister Marie de Pierre, or Mary of Peter, in Tours. So that was in the early 1840s. She died in 1848. This preceded Salette. La Salette was, in many senses, a underpinning of that, arguably. Okay. I was in La Salette during the summer. Another story about that I can tell you about, but as well as Garabandal, which we must talk about. But in the 1840s, so we have Sister Marie de Pierre. So she's getting these visitations, and the visitations are saying, and they're approved by the church, not in the particular or the worship that came out of that. She's getting this, the messages that there's great blasphemy and that the revolution is essentially a blasphemy against God and against the first commandment, the second commandment. And this was the thing that always intrigued me about La Salette. Why was it so central about saying the name of the Lord in vain? Why was that so critical? It took me a long time to understand that. This is what comes out in Salette. So what these visitations say is that there's blasphemy, but it can be repaired. And the repair is by concentrating on the holy face of Jesus. So she dies in 1848 when the Communist Manifesto comes out. So
all the revolutions too.
Yeah, all the revolution. There's a remarkable correspondence with this juxtaposition of something which is said to be the idea, and the implication was that concentration on the human, on the holy face of Jesus. There's different representations of that in tradition, from the Shroud of Turin, San Sebastian, Rapello. There's different representations, but it's about concentrating on Jesus, or the Veronica's icon, or images of that, and that's there throughout the Western tradition. There are pictures of Veronica's veil throughout Western art as well, or things equivalent to Turin Shroud or Rapello. And if you look at the proportions of many of the medieval painters, it was clear they had references to some undercurrent blueprint, which probably referred back to previous things. So now modern painting, a lot of people, again, I say 1863 because it fits in with my understanding the start of modernism in painting, with Manet and all that. But if we look at this, you begin to say, well, what is so significant about faith? What is so significant about this idea of focusing on the face of Jesus? And that's all it really requires. And there's a prayer about about healing, the name of the Lord, the unpronounceable name of the Lord, or that which is beyond articulation and common parlance, is the implication, going back to an early idea in Judaism about the unutterability, if you like, of the name of God. And it's really for me in shorthand, it's a rejection of atheist materialism. Now, I apply, because I believe it's the same base in capitalism or in communism. That's the juxtaposition about atheist materialism and the denial of the supernatural. In all these things, for me, the key sin message is simply that, the denial of the supernatural. It's not so much the other things, it's the failure to accept that there is another dimension. I really believe that that's the central thing. So out of that, the image goes to Rome. There's a kind of miracle, and then we get the sanction of the worship of the Holy Face. It's a funny little story. In Ireland, post-Christian Ireland, there was a group, I think they're called the Holy Faith. They worship the Holy Faith or something. And they had an advertising campaign, which I thought was brilliant, which I just heard about, I don't know, a couple of years ago. They didn't say anything about Christ or about Christianity. They just put up pictures of the Shroud of Turin around and bus stops and things like that, and paid for it. And there was no criticisms. If they had said something, this is Christian thing, and it would have been defaced, I imagine. Yeah. But the people didn't kind of know what it was. But I mean, the implication was that there's power in the face and contemplating the face. And this is what, as an artist, I have always believed in. It's the same as in music, you're looking for the sound. In the Western tradition, it's drawing you to look at the face, because the face is the expressive bit of the soul, of the character. So the divine, sorry.
Oh, no, it's just I'm just thinking at my beloved Abbey of the Genesee, in their foyer, they've chosen to put all these quotes from St. Macarius the Great, that to the effect that Jesus Christ is all face. The face. There's all these great things from the church fathers on the face.
The implication of this for me is that, and especially when the doors of the churches are closing, which is kind of anticipating Garabandal in some senses.
Interesting, right?
If people believe in that, unapproved, but I believe it is true. When the doors are closed and you have these conundrums that you've been talking about, well, how do you, as a Catholic or continuing that tradition, worship? There's an implication that the worship of the Holy Face is a thing that's available to everybody, as an easy thing. Now, in this thing, there's a thing that people don't understand. There's an idea that it's one-way traffic in these things. This is a thing that I think we got wrong somewhere. It's the idea as well of a prayer that is a kind of something you throw like a stone into the heavens, but for me, the supernatural, the holy world, the higher spirits, God, whatever you want to call, they are forces that we reflexively enter into accord with. So it's a two-way process. But in order to do so, you have to come with something in order for the process to happen. It's not going to come, necessarily. But you can't expect it to come and bow down before you.
I think this is very important, but like you quoted me almost saying, like, what are our practices? The sense, it seems to me like the difference between, so face, prosopina, the idea of, the personality, as opposed to being individualism, personality. It almost seems like the Immaculate Conception, as I see it, is, not all was lost at Eden. There's a divine sap, this fructifying force that the Romantics kind of dialed in on. And it's not a form of Pelagianism to say, Jesus needs a little skin in the game to start working with you. When I'm working with college students, I'm always sitting in my chair and I think of whatever psalm that says, like, I will guide you little by little. If we can get up and start moving a little bit, God will guide us here and there. But what you were saying, James, implies kind of an organic metaphor that this journey, and again, not like necessarily a Pelagianism, but you gotta, help us with that. You got to get into the dance. You got to go to the dance to get in the game. You've got to take a risk on something in life,
Well, look at if you like, in many ways, one of the first converts after Jesus crucified, the robber. He didn't say to him, oh, look, I don't like all how you've lived your life, or whatever it was, or a rebel
Right.
robber, depending on the reading. He didn't say, I don't fancy what you've done hitherto. That's not being good.
Yeah.
I don't like you. You're not the type that we want. The key thing was his belief. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
This is not, I'm not saying in a Protestant sense of, a declaration of, it's a genuine opening up to the thing itself. And then it works on you. That's the reflexivity of it. So it's a similar thing with the faith. And a vindication of this is, I see, in the Jewish American therapists, that, and particularly the ones that came from Germany, escaped from Germany, and went to America and were influential in the therapeutic movement, in a positive sense, or psychotherapeutic movement, like
Fromm and others. Yeah,
Kurt
Eric
Goldstein,
Fromm.
I think, was, who influenced Maslow and self-actualization, I think came from Goldstein. And he emphasizes the face. He'd come to the thing that the face-to-face is a critical thing of all humanity.
It is critical.
So he, coming from a different angle, comes to this face-to-face being the critical thing. So from a different angle, it's again another, for me, a vindication, because I'm a pragmatic cosmopolitan. I describe myself as a.
Well, people say, like, think of John Bowlby or something, the attachment theories. Some people say John Bowlby in the field of psychology was the greatest scientist in any field in the 20th century, depending on where you put your moral valuations. But for him, the whole idea was, they can talk about the exact distance between a mother's eyes, her face, and the baby who's suckling. And that interaction in the smiles and the goos and that thing, that's where we need our anthropology, because psychologists know they can't say it's two individuals there. It's a one and many at the same time. So it's got that poetic metaphysics that Michael's so much about. And also, that's where all of personality is. All of personality, intersubjectivity is born in that moment. So the halo surrounds the divine. Michael, you're getting in here. Yeah.
But so what's the main thing that the archons went after at the beginning of the pandemic?
Birth.
Yeah,
the face.
Exactly.
Yeah. The face. Yeah.
Covering the face. It was a teacher,
wasn't an accident.
No, absolutely not. And I mentioned it before.
I agree.
I have, like, say, 60 to 100 students per semester, and I usually know all their names by the third week. I forget them after the semester is over, but I remember, when I see them on a regular basis, remember their names. That year teaching in mask, I didn't know anybody's name. I didn't know them at all. And the weird thing, and I mentioned this before, walking across campus, and I saw one of the students from one of my classes without the mask on, and I realized that my brain had filled in the bottom half of the face.
Somewhat correctly or no? Okay.
Incorrectly.
Yeah, mine is always incorrectly.
But that, that's what magic is, right? So magic operates not only by the image, and this is why it's important in James' work as a painter, and in poetry, it's all about the image. But the other part of it is
you faded there, Michael.
Let the.
Now you're back.
Okay, but that's what happens: is an incomplete image appears, and which is how advertising works, right? And it allows the subject to fill it in and become implicated in the, we can call it the spell, or the propaganda, or whatever you want to call it, right? That's what happens, is you got to leave part of it for the subject. That's black magic. Also, it happens in white magic too. Rudolf Steiner, his recommendation for children using dolls, to not give them a doll that has all the features complete. Just have a rag doll with a couple of dots for eyes and a curve for a smile, because the child's imagination will do the rest. But it works both ways, and the archons know it works both ways, and they're trying to disarm our own, we could call it our capacity for good magic, by giving us all these pre-digested images at the same time, while using a kind of dark magic, or we can call it suggestion, because it works the same way, to cast the spell. And we
You're
saw
right.
this. We saw this at scale over the pandemic, and some people are still under the spell.
Um, I wore a mask once when I was bringing my daughter to the dentist. I had no choice, and thankfully I didn't wear it. That was it. But yes, it was an attack on that. And even now, we're talking on an interface. Now, in the future, it'll be more inter than face, because we're in the honeymoon period at this stage when they're getting us sucked in, and they'll manage that. But go back to C.S. Lewis. Some people think his best book is Till We Have Faces.
Many people do, yeah.
A myth retold. Now, what is the point in that? In my view, again, we can reduce. I don't want to, of course, reduce the thing, but there's a key aspect relevant to us. The whole point is that the gods cannot see you till you have a face. You can't be seen in the other world or in this world. You have to get a face. So this is very, very important. So there's another practice. There's another practice or idea.
And that's also what I was trying to say. Yeah, they can't save you until you have a face.
They can't even see you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they can't.
So this is important. And this is important about identity. We have one identity as a spiritual being in our physical identity. That's our primary one. And then the other things flow after that. But if we lose that, you don't have a spiritual face. So you're talking about moving into the land of hungry ghosts, if you don't want to do it in Christian terms, because you can't be seen. So the reason why you have to come out as in your spiritual identity is so you participate in this world and in the next one. So it's come out ye from among them. It's to say, be your inner self.
And isn't that kind of like the cursing of the barren fig tree, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, they say, you know, Jesus didn't curse Pilate, but he cursed the barren fig tree, you know, and again, it means like, unless you produce some fruit in the form of a face, you can't be seen.
Yeah. And, or the talents, if you like, another kind of version of it. And it also, there's another element to it, which we can see in contrast, again, going back to the Salome period and Oscar Wilde or Robert Louis Stevenson, we have the split personality. We have the picture of Dorian Gray. You know, you have the outside and you have the inside, or we have Jekyll and Hyde. And the objective, as far as I can see in the spiritual journey, is to make your outward face and your inward face be the same thing, so that there is no difference, that you're not two-faced, you're not having a mask on persona, that you are living, but then you have to come out and you have to take the consequences of that. And this is the crucial thing.
I think
it doesn't say that you have to be a saint. It says that you have to at least commit yourself to something that is promised to you.
Or again, maybe we've kind of characterized in the church a form of sanctity that's more reducible to something like a spreadsheet and not this sense of, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think an interesting feeling I have, I'm very interested in the traditionalist movement, and I can see it, it's very, very interesting here in Sweden. Maybe you should talk to one of the younger people from that, because there are some very interesting phenomena.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah, but and you talk about little the obsessive bit, which I think is interesting, because I'll be honest, okay, yeah, I can understand that. There's another thing that I fear about it, is that I hear there's a lot of converts from Protestantism, and I don't recognize the Catholicism they're bringing. It's just not familiar to me.
Yeah, interesting.
From my Irish tradition, which was more affinity with the pre-Norman Catholicism of the church. If you think about it, this is the thing that people don't understand. When the Normans invaded Ireland, they were Catholics invading a Catholic country.
Right.
People don't understand that. So there was two types of Catholicism. It wasn't about Catholicism, it was used. But we had Norman Catholicism, which I believe, again, is a critical problem in it. But the earlier Catholicism, as we know, was much different. And so I hear these people going, and some of the things I'm concerned, because they set a standard that's too high. it's the standard that they're setting. You know what I mean? You have to do this, and you don't do this, and you don't do this. And I'm saying, hold on a second. This is what Jesus came to fight against. With this is what he was saying. He was being antinomian.
Yeah, right.
So I just don't get. I don't. So some of it is. There's something not quite for me. I'm wanting to see a bit more. I understand about the traditional ritualism, and I'm attracted to that. I'm attracted to the continuity of the mass, and the symbolism of that, and the history and the tradition,
the baggage that comes with it.
Yeah. But there's a challenge there for people not to become something that's not actually in the tradition, as far as I can say. Certainly not in my tradition. At least we had plenty of 1,500 years familiarity with the tradition in Ireland before they began to jettison. So
what's most, give us 10 seconds. What's most shocking to you on that? When you say it just doesn't resemble the tradition. So for some of our rad trad, we have a lot of rad trad listeners. Michael knows that. He doesn't send them away. He's a magnet for them. But like, what if you were describing to somebody like the distinction between what you saw as Catholicism, what you felt in your body and in your senses, and what they're doing? Unpack that a little bit.
Well, there's no question that the new mass didn't work. There's no question that was a key point.
I think it's part of this transition you're talking about, though.
Yeah.
But that's for another time.
It didn't work. So that's one point. And what I'm really talking about is what I can see as the remnants of the and we may not necessarily, but I think 63 was the key here. Was the remnants of a grounded Catholicism, which was informed by connection with the earth, which was much older, which brings in all the traditions of.
But didn't it, in one sense, couldn't you look at World War I? Some people would say, like, the goal of the Christian Levin, one of them was to take the Frankish out of the Frank, in one sense, like the skull. It was to take, and all of a sudden we thought it had kind of, to take the tribal feeling away. Jesus said, even leave father and mother behind. There was this new thing, it was supposed to work over time. Then all of a sudden World War I happens, and they just go primal again. The Franks were just fighting. It was a bloodlust. And we hadn't been separated from which for me would, when you're thinking of 1963, was Vatican II just something after the fact that all of a sudden there was this great failure incumbent on the beginning of World War I, which historians don't even want to distinguish between World War II anymore. It was just this crazy world thing. Michael? Yeah.
Well, let me throw this out. So I think what the archons are trying to forge right now, and I did see something recently there, with somebody proposing getting rid of all languages, get one language across the whole planet, right? I think what they're after is creating a kind of diabolical parody of the idea of Christendom, which is, it's central control from the top.
Oh yeah. The worst is the corruption of the best.
They're doing, and I think that's probably why the popes and the patriarchs haven't said anything.
Yeah, the difference between
because
unity and uniformity.
Yeah, okay, let's go there. And I think that's probably what needs to die.
And that's the legend of the Grand Inquisitor again. In one sense, it's the same dynamic.
Well, no, I mean, it's just, if you have those guys are, as Guido Rogers in his most recent book on Empire and Church that I wrote the introduction to, that was the deal. That's the I mean, literally the deal between the archons, or the British Anglo-American Empire, and the Vatican, right? And I mean, I think it's just it's diabolical, because we talk a lot about distributism, like local, right? Localism. Mm-hmm. It's the opposite of that. And the thing is, totally. The Irish Church forever was exactly that localist. It had a stronger local organization.
And that's why I say, like, the Marian, the feminine dimension is always local. Mary, at La Salette shows up at solar noon. All these local things. The divine feminine is different. All these different Marian apparitions, different springs and wells. James, your response.
Another practice, by the way, for your students is to think about numbers. And there is a number, I don't know, I was trying to investigate recently, I haven't clarified this, about Akita 101 and the significance of that. The other significant number to reflect on is 137, which I'll explain some other time.
That's the number that fish caught in Jesus's how many fish did he catch in that huge? That was a 137, isn't it?
137, I believe, because this was the number that Feynman, Jung, Pauli thought was the critical meaning of the universe. It's the fine structure constant. It's a very, very important physical thing. But the symbol of 1, 3, and 7 is a critical thing. But we talk about that. 101 is another one that comes up in the context of Akita. And there's some people say that it's Eve, 0 is God, and 1 is the Virgin Mary in a rebalancing, which is.
And I was wrong with the Hall of Fish from Jesus, which was 153, which has some 17.
I'll talk about.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about that again sometime, because it's a fascinating. It's a key thing. It's going to come up in the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So 1. What's the significance of this 1? One world. U2 doing our 1, named after a military drone or whatever it was, a spy plane. 1. What is this moving towards 1? It's made clear by Arthur C. Clarke in how the world was won, WON, and he describes it in his essay. He gives it away, really. It goes back to the Tower of Babel and Babylon, and what was the reason why God said that there shouldn't be one language? Because if the people joined together in one language, nothing would be impossible for them. So they have taken it, the opponents have taken it and said that if we establish a one system, nothing will be impossible and God won't be able to oppose us. That's their reading. It's not that they don't believe it. Mm-hmm. That's why they're going to the one. Nothing about diversity. Right. It's about making everything one. And of course, there's a standardization for computer systems.
That's why they're trying to dismantle or just make gender disappear. And
it's all
right.
So I'll move on to the head bit, so we'll have time just to finish. So we have the skull, and we have the counterpoint of emphasizing the face. And again, in Salette, there's an implication. One point to mention about Salette: it's very, very difficult to get good sources. I've been reading the original French sources on Salette, and one thing which is terrible, talking about defacing, if you look at the reports about Maximin, the boy, they paint him as a very dissolute figure. I was actually camping about a couple of 100 yards from where his grave is. That's what happens. Wow. Just
where was that? Down in Grenoble or something?
I know it's in Corps, the local town to Salette, up on the mountains. But if you read the reports in the first person in French about the people that met him, he was utterly consistent, absolutely noble in relation to what he said, in relation to his refusal to take money, and it has been so misrepresented since. And these stuff are not. We'll talk about that again some other time. But come to the head then. Now, why this is important again? If we think about Kennedy's assassination, there's more to it than whatever happened. There's a deep symbolic attack showing that there is another force which has power over the head and of the head of state. There is deeper power. They're telling you, they're showing you in 63 again.
We agree with that.
Remember the Beatles, for example, came in 1964, which is very interesting. And that was the same time that Malachi Martin left Rome and said, I'm going to be. It's very, very interesting. It was the same year that the pill became widespread and critical, which I think was the really start of the full force of the 60s and the prosthesis element of psychedelics. But so the head becomes critical. You've talked about John the Baptist, one with Kennedy, etc. It goes back to the Salome. But where it fits into and explains is in a figure that Guido Preparata rightly pointed a finger to, and I've seen articles he's written a decade ago on George Bataille.
Yeah, so much, right.
Now,
so the whole book, listeners, The Ideology of Tyranny, it's a seminal, again, and treads. he's saying Pope Benedict got it wrong on cultural relativism, but it gives the, that's an entrance point for some. The other would just be political correctness. But the genealogy is very, very important.
Yeah.
George Bataille.
So I was following me symbolic way. Now, I've read a lot of that, and I'm writing a little book on post-humanism at the moment. But independently of that, I was saying, okay, well, if we want to see the misrepresentation, the counterpoint, the modern manifestation, put apart Skull and Bones and all that, which I do actually think is in the picture, but put apart the military-industrial complex, where can we see the cultural manifestations of this ancient thing in terms of what I have said it to be? Now, of course, communism, comes up in all these operations, and in Garabandal, they talk about the return of communism, and it's another story. But I'm emphasizing militant materialism, whether it's capitalism or communism, that they both can be equally destructive, especially if we're talking about cartel system. So the head becomes critical. So if you come to the symbol of George Bataille and his movement, it's acephale, it's the headless.
Yeah,
this
headless.
is it.
That creature.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is what you get when you've done what they want to do. Mm-hmm. This is the remains. And the other thing, of course, in 66, I don't know, 71 maybe, Foucault talks about the face being washed away.
Yeah.
It's a key symbol, but it's also a key desire. This is reflecting a policy as opposed to a mere description. It's the face being washed away. So that's that postmodernism. And so intuitively, I began to look at this figure, George Bataille, and I don't really like reading them because there's some people you read and there's something sinister.
Like the Marquis de Sade or something, yeah.
Well, that's a big person for him.
Yeah.
So what I have argued is that the totalitarian system that we face, which will be left and right joined in a technocratic system, will be sadistic in a way that has never happened before. It will be fetishistically sadistic. Now, when you go back to the First World War, I believe it kind of parallels Lewis Mumford's view of the car system, that there's a sacrificial element. I believe the First World War was really, there was a deeper blood sacrifice element to it. Again, going back to the Norman thing, again, going back to the Plantagenets, their love of blood, sitting in the blood-stained clothes, Richard II, all this kind of stuff. The deep, deep love of destruction and application of the myth. It's not accident. It didn't happen because people didn't know what to do. They wanted to destroy that amount of people. That's the thing that you can't find in the books, but they desired to do so. So what is this headless figure? We have to look at these symbols because it tells us a couple of things. It's interesting. The skull is in this. So the skull is in this acephale. Where is this skull? It's in the groin. So the head is gone, so the remains are in the groin. Now, what does that symbolize? It symbolizes the desire that Arthur C. Clarke indicated when in this supposedly hypothetical conversation he has with, I Remember Babylon, where the satellite controllers are saying, we're going to ruin America, take over the world, and we're going to use the Kinsey report to do so.
Okay.
So you don't have a face, you don't have a head, but you have a kind of simulacrum in your groin.
It's going to be a lot of sex.
The implication is that by focusing on the ID, the id, that you get the skull, you put it down, your head, your mind is gone.
It's brilliant.
Your spirit is gone. And there's another funny point. I have criticized the rapture theology, John Nelson Darby, another guy that studied in Trinity and the King's Inn like I did. And I believe that it's a British imperial lever in my reading of it. And I believe it's not going to happen. But there's a lot of talk about the end of times, the end of the world and recycles and all that. Now, I don't believe in them in the same way. So something's going to happen faithfully for that purpose. I don't believe it. But if we go back to St. Paul's letter about it's a passage that they use in the rapture, but there's an expression about beware of a great shaking of the mind. So in warning them about talk about the end of the world, it's saying don't lose your mind. Now, sometimes that's translated, particularly in other languages, as don't lose your head. So St. Paul is saying, don't lose your head thinking about the end of the times. Again, in my reading of the head thing, it's a number of different, losing your mental way, losing your mind, losing your social thing, but it's literal. It's a literal address to this context. So this acephale figure, a key element of this, there is a dark, sadistic. Now, I'm not. It's kind of hard to shock me. It's hard to. I'm not prudish. I don't care about what people do or adults do in their own time. I'm not judgmental on that. But Bataille is weird in an occult. He's weird, and there's a feeling that comes. I don't like reading much about the Red Moor, but I don't like it. And they wanted to have human sacrifice. So this is the main influence on Foucault and postmodernism. This is the genealogy.
Yeah,
so in
it's
pointing
the correct
that
genealogy.
Out, yeah. So I come to that reading of it, and independently, with the dogs coming to the same place.
Yeah.
Independently, when I read from a different analysis, from a more internal, informed analysis from Guido Preparata, who's familiar with the literature and takes it from that internally, he comes to the same thing, and that's right. So this parentage of the postmodernist movement is the same as the post-humans kind of say, well, we're not the Enlightenment people, we're like the postmodern. They're in the same thing. Now, what I say to people, and this is not the hell thing, is what I do say to academics as well, any academics that are listening. At this stage, you are part of the issue and you have to take the consequences of what's coming in your name. When you stand and you write these articles, you will have to bear the consequence. This is my belief. I'm just saying it, but a challenge or otherwise. And if you look at, and I have been looking at some of the post-humans that tell us all about their love of the marginalized and the weak and the oppressed. And if you look at the money they're getting, I have been looking at the contracts. And if you look at who is paying them on the published records, and some of the money for the post-humanists, it's unbelievable. You should go into post-humanism, but if you're short of money, there's a lot of money in this. And the idea that this is not part of the military industrial complex, if you don't understand that by now, people, you're really not understanding what's going on. So, I would say that the young scholars that are fooled by some of these notions, that you will end up serving. There's a big game going on. If you don't know what the rules of the game are, you're liable to be serving people that you don't want to be serving. Don't do it. Read about what and question the assumptions. So I agree with Guido on that, and that comes to me from an utterly different route. I mean, I read the literature as well, but my instincts force me to look at and follow the symbology, which is the sign of the thing. And Bataille is crucial in that. He's also actually an influence on Bacon, which is another question. I'm not as hard on Bacon, but
and also Judith Butler.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, in a way you could call what a lot of what we've been dealing with culturally with gender and so forth is kind of the lab leak theory from the humanities departments of universities. It's a virus that was contained in the universities, but now it's spread, and it's
great. Have you written on that, Mike? That's great.
I don't know if I have.
The lab leak theory of the human universities. How about like we kind of call it, because James, you're going to be a regular, you know that. So I think, bringing it together, especially, for some of our listeners, that you're saying, and I see it clearly because I know you guys both, how you're getting at this, how Guido's getting this. I wondered if you want to come on the same time as him, but let's, I think having you two kind of do your things for a while, we'll keep on bringing you. And then like a year down the road, then the four of us get together and we'll see how some of this kind of metastasizes. But
I think he
yeah.
should be recognized for that work that he's doing, particularly on that specific issue.
Yeah.
It's complex, and I think you should.
Yeah.
We need to hear more from that on that particular issue, just on the significance of this figure and what.
Yeah, and I think, you know, partially because I was just this week listening to an interview with him, and the interviewer is quite good. Maybe he's listening and I forget the name, but he said he discovered Preparata through the Regeneration podcast and was shocked to hear our name. But the you know, a lot of people, because I've been reading Guido and known him for a long time, some people who don't know him so well are interviewing him now, and it's great because they're coming in, you know, they're not getting in the weeds. They're just kind of getting the big picture quick. And that's for some people who get confused by him, step back. And also because he's been a dear friend like James Tunney to the Regeneration podcast, Guido has a lot of books released recently, 4, in fact. One is called The Political Scripting of Jesus. One is on from the Twin Towers through the debacle in Afghanistan. One is an abridged version of his book, Conjuring Hitler. And the other one is the one that Michael Martin wrote the introduction from, called Empire and Church. And James, tell us, link people again to your works. And you sell some of your artwork. Again, we're kind of captivated. Go ahead. Yeah, finish up.
JamesTunney.com. There's another James Tunney somewhere. I don't do anything else on social media.
We don't like that, James Tunney. We're never having him on the show, ever. But, he's dead to us, James.
So have a look. JamesTunney.com. So
we hate that other James Tunney.
Just to finish on a nice man, I've heard.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Writing spiritual stuff. Good luck. Don't get me now advertising him. Anyway. Well, you have a fan here called Gullivi. You have to say hello to in Sweden. She thinks you're very funny and witty.
Oh, great.
I didn't know. I had to ask her what you mean, funny peculiar or funny haha, but she thinks you're funny.
Yeah, in my family, we always say like funny haha or funny strange funny. We always when somebody comes home from work and they say I got a funny story, everybody in our family, bar none, will immediately say funny haha or funny strange funny.
Yeah.
So
just to make me last point, and I have read Guido's recent article on insects, which is interesting. The insectification is very, very interesting because this is another world to think about. And
where did you see that recent article? I'm not so sure I've even seen it.
I think it was 2023.
Okay, gotcha.
But it's also consistent with some of the arguments I've been making. But the last point, just the justification why you want to have a face is. I wrote about 20 years ago, maybe longer, predicting what I call the ghost host community. The ghost host community. It's going to happen in Ireland, that the host community becomes a ghost.
Yeah.
And this same thing now, some of these things are gone. Some of the countries are gone now, okay? They're just gone. They're not going to come back in the way that they are. But what you don't want to happen is for you to become a ghost. And this is literally the danger that's happening. This is why you have to assert your spiritual consciousness. On the positive side, I was in Garabandal. I had the good fortune to meet Jacinta, one of the seers at Garabandal. And she presented a cross to kiss. Now, this is quite incredible. This is the cross that's, according to them, kissed by the Virgin Mary. And that kind of, I found that amazing.
Amazing.
Why was the Virgin Mary kissed? This is, and of course, in the counterpoint thing, this is the counterbalance to the Judas kiss. So this is the counterbalance. Now,
and the kiss of Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. And I said Jesus would work through that. But now I don't care what people think about this. And I understand the dangers of being fanciful. And I'm not interested in self-aggrandizement or in advocating some special position that I have. But I was very, very conscious when I was kissing her because of that, to try and distance myself from it in some sense, to sense what I was sensing, if you know what I mean, as you would do in a kind of analytical sense as well, to have different parts of your being looking at the thing or be aware of it. As I said, I don't really care what other people say, hallucinating or imagining.
Yeah, right.
So when I kissed that cross, and you could say, well, this is all the projected thing from all the people that did it, or psychometrically, or it's the power of the woman herself, or whatever. But I felt a very, very clear thing. So when you're talking about the word immaculate, I believe that means utterly clarified. That's what it means. Utter clarification. It's a bit, because immaculate sometimes sounds a bit prissy for me.
Yeah.
Immaculate,
like doily, nice white lace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, lace curtains or something like that. Yeah, no, it's utterly clarified. And what registered with me was that and this is the second point, another point, and I'd say it for, again, your students in particular. These things are not intellectual. These things about Christ and about the Virgin Mary, they're not constructions. They're not what the materialists call egregores or what. They're real forces that you interact with. They're real things. So there was force in that. I call it spiritual light. I've written. So you feel spiritual light. Spiritual light is affective. It affects it, and it's noetic. You can understand things. What I understood in that is two things. One, that immaculate force is utterly clarifying, loving, of course, and another thing, that it's utterly above rationalization, intellectualization, putting in words. I know it's classic, it's a cliche, it's ineffable. Ineffable means ineffable. It means it's incapable of being understood intellectually or reported accurately. That it is literally a force. Now, what these things are saying is that these forces are there for you to apply. And when the conduit is opened, as you were talking about, going a bit down the road, or if you want to, in mythic terms, Joseph Campbell, committing yourself to the hero's journey. You have to commit yourself to the hero's journey on the path before the helpers can help you. They can't help you.
That's great. You're
not going to get it. It's not up for you to decide. You don't have every answer. Or if you did, you wouldn't be a hero. You'd be something else. You'd be a god like these guys think they are. So the other point is that by exposing yourself to the respect for the thing, the gateway to the accepting the inherent power or truth of the thing, well, then it's like the thief who's guaranteed to go to paradise. It's the opening of the straight path by committing to it and saying, well, actually, a lot of these other things don't actually work, as a lot of people know by having tried them. They're dead ends, they're cul-de-sacs. They won't get you anywhere. So it's a force. And that kiss, if you like, is a reaffirmation of the humanity of the person, of the being, of the physicalness, of the resistance necessary to combat daft, simulacrum, transhumanist, post-humanist. And it's down to the people. You have it. And the only thing you have to do, the one thing you have to do is commit to your own spiritual consciousness as a reflection of divine consciousness. And that's the starting point of it.
That's great. What a conclusion.
That's what Jakob Burma calls the kiss of Sophia.
Yeah.
Great.
And in Tom Berg's chapter on force in Meditations in the Tarot, again, if people are looking for, as you're saying, you and Guido coming at these things, this is, this is the central mystery of our time, I think. So James Tunney, fascinating. Again, it's on the eve of, as I said, American Thanksgiving, which is big. Thanksgiving to James Tunney for coming on the show. Yeah. And I'll probably post this Saturday morning, so people will be well digested of their Thursday turkey and so forth. Michael Martin, are you eating a bird that you killed?
No, but it's one I got from my Amish friends.
Oh, okay, they killed it. Excellent.
So we didn't raise turkeys.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, and thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. See you next week.